One evening, when I was in my junior year of high school, my mom and dad went out, leaving me home alone. I had a lot of homework to do, so I spent the whole evening sitting at the desk in my bedroom. My parents left the house around 6 p.m. While I was doing my homework, I put on my headphones and listened to loud music. There was a big storm that night, and my desk was facing the window, so I could see the rain and the lightning outside. My parents got back around 11 p.m. When I saw their car drive up, I took off the headphones. As soon as my mom opened the front door and came inside, I heard her shout my name. "What on earth happened here?" she demanded in an angry voice. Confused, I ran downstairs. My mom was standing in the hallway with a furious look on her face. She pointed at the floor and yelled, "Was this you?" I looked down and saw the carpet was covered in muddy footprints. "I have no idea how those got there," I said. "I spent the whole night at my desk doing my homework." I watched as the look on her face changed from anger to confusion and then fear. We both realized that at the same time. Someone else must have been in the house. We followed the trail of footprints, trying to make sense of the whole situation. They started at the back door, which we usually left unlocked. Then we noticed something else. The footprints started at the back door, but there was no trail of footprints leaving through the back door. All of a sudden, we hear something loud, a pounding noise that echoed throughout the house. Then, the sound of the front door being wrenched open and slammed shut. We all ran into the garage and locked the door behind us. My mom took out her cell phone and called the police. "Please, come quickly," she shouted. "Someone's in our house." After what seemed like hours, a patrol car arrived with 2 police officers, a male and a female. One officer stayed with us in the garage while his partner went through the house, searching it room by room. When she came back, the female officer told us that there was no one in the house and it was safe to go back in. As we were all breathing a sigh of relief, she asked, "Whose bedroom is upstairs on the left?" My parents looked at me. "It's mine," I told the officer. She asked us to follow her. As we walked through the house, we could see the trail of muddy footprints leading from the back door, through the living room, through the hallway, up the stairs into my parents' bedroom, and then towards my room. They stopped at my doorway. The female officer pointed at my door, which had been open the whole night. Scrawled on it, in black marker, was the following: 8:47 p.m. I see you. 8:53 p.m. You forgot to lock the back door. 8:59 p.m. You seem focused. 9:24. Turn around. 9:47. Look at me. 10:15. Look at me. 10:37. Look at me. 10:49. Look at me. For more than 2 hours, someone had been standing in my doorway watching me. To this day, I still shudder to think what would have happened if I had turned around. When I was 19 years old, I worked as a counselor in a summer camp. It was really gorgeous, with wooden cabins and a lake, but it was in the middle of nowhere. The camp was surrounded by dense woods. There was nothing but trees and canyons, and the closest town was over 20 miles away. One night, when everyone had turned in and was sleeping soundly, I was suddenly awoken in the middle of the night. It was one of those times where you wake up and you have the feeling that something is not quite right. My heart was racing for no apparent reason. I just lay there quietly, listening intently. The whole cabin was wooden, with fly screens over the windows, so I could hear the sound of the crickets and the breeze blowing through the trees. That's when I heard it, a very faint cry for help. It sounded like it was coming from the woods. It was the cry of a young girl, lost somewhere out in the woods. I quickly got out of bed and woke my roommate, who was another counselor. I told him to listen, and when the cry came again, we both heard it. We quickly got dressed, grabbed our flashlights, and hurried outside in the direction the sound was coming from. It was intermittent, but I could clearly hear the girl's voice saying, "Help!" or "I'm lost." It happened quite regularly, and quite a way into the woods. She sounded like she was in a lot of distress. The quicker we found her, the better, so we could get her back to camp safely. It was dark as hell that night, and all we had to light our way were 2 puny flashlights. The girl was out there in the pitch black with no way of seeing anything at all. The boys' cabins were on one side of the lake and the girls were on the other. On the way, we ran into a female counselor. She had also heard the cries from her side of the camp. All 3 of us headed into the woods together, shining our flashlights left and right and calling out to the lost girl. We were reluctant to go too far into the woods because we didn't want to get lost in the darkness. Whenever we called out to the girl and heard her respond, it sounded like she was quite far in. After walking for about 5 minutes, we could hear her crying and sniffling, so we knew we were close. It sounded like she was only a few feet away, and we could hear her saying, "I'm scared. Where am I?" in a low voice. We kept trying to reassure her, and just when we felt we were right beside her, she suddenly went silent. "We're here! Where are you?" we called out, but there was no answer. Then, in the distance, we heard her voice again, crying, "Help me! I'm lost! Come quick!" We started toward the sound of her cries, and just when we felt that we were right on top of her again, she went silent. We called out to her. We waited for her reply and got nothing. Then, from even further away, we heard her voice again. "Help! Why can't you help me?" Something didn't feel right. We all looked at each other, and without a word, we decided to head back to camp. We called out to the girl and told her we were going to get help and we would come back with a search party. We could still hear her faint whimpers and crying sounds from her, so we told her to sit tight and we would be back soon. The 3 of us sprinted back to camp and rang the big bell at the main office to alert the whole camp that there was an emergency. The camp manager switched on the floodlights, and we all met in the quad for a roll call and a head count. They started by calling names of the counselors. We were all present. Then, they called the names of the campers. All of the kids were present. Nobody was missing. They went through the roll call twice, and 3 times. Every single person that was meant to be at the camp was checked off and present. But what about the voice of the girl? The camp manager and the other counselors thought it was a false alarm and said that what we heard must have been just echoes of our own voices. They dismissed everyone and sent us back to bed. The 3 of us knew what we heard, and it wasn't an echo. It was creepy as hell. The voice kept leading us into the woods further and further. Someone, or something, was luring us deeper into the woods, and to this day, I have no idea what it intended to do to us. This by far was the creepiest thing I've ever experienced. Myself and the female counselor believed it was something paranormal, but neither of us could explain it. The counselor, who was my roommate, refused to talk about it, and whenever we brought it up, he would say it was just voices echoing. But when I looked into his eyes, I could see that he was scared to death. He just wanted to convince himself that it didn't happen. It was a cold December night, and I was just a kid. The stack of firewood was nearing the bottom, and my grandmother knew it wouldn't last till morning. She asked my uncle to fetch up some more from the mountains, and my uncle took me with him and we drove off in his pickup truck. He chopped the wood and I stacked it as fast as I could. By the time we finished, the sun was setting and the bed of the pickup truck was half full. On the way home, the sun disappeared from the sky and it grew very dark. We were driving down a dirt road that led through the woods. I leaned my head against the window and watched the silhouettes of the trees race past as the stars twinkled above them. All of a sudden, I got the awful feeling that we were being watched. The hair in the back of my neck stood up and a chill ran down my spine. My uncle had a strange look on his face, and he was staring directly ahead. Just then, I heard a tap, tap, tap on the window behind me. I started to turn around, but my uncle suddenly shouted, "Don't!" I completely froze. My heart started beating rapidly. My uncle put his foot down on the accelerator and we began to speed up. It was the first time I'd ever seen real fear on my uncle's face. I heard another tap, tap, tap on the window beside me. "Look at me," my uncle shouted. "Don't turn around. Keep looking at me." I didn't know what was going on. My mind was racing. All of a sudden, I felt the truck dip as if something heavy had landed on the back. My uncle sped up even more and started praying loudly in our native language. I wanted to cry. I wanted it to stop. Once again, I heard the tap on the window behind me. "Just keep looking at me and don't turn away," my uncle cried over and over. I could see he was on the verge of tears. He was driving faster and faster, pushing the engine to its limits. My heart was beating so rapidly, I thought it would leap out of my chest. It was getting harder for me to breathe. I shut my eyes as tight as I could and whispered a prayer. A minute or two passed and the truck dipped again. My uncle looked around and let out a deep sigh of relief. He slowed down and everything was quiet again. All I could hear was the drone of the truck's engine and the crunch of the gravel on the dirt road. My uncle looked at me and said, "We will have your father do a prayer in the morning so that evil will forget our faces." I remember curling up on the seat and just staring at the clock on the dashboard as I listened. My uncle saying an old prayer. By the time we got back to my grandmother's house, I was almost asleep. My uncle carried me inside and put me to bed. To this day, my uncle has never talked about what happened that night.